F122 has been out for a few months now, and it's fairly safe to say that it hasn't quite been all things to all people. Codemasters have been developing one new F1 game every single year since 2009. That's a lot of games, and not much opportunity to innovate between them. It's a bit ironic then that this topic's being taken up by someone who would rather watch a 2-minute clip of Alonso lapping his R25 in Abu Dhabi on loop for an hour than a modern Formula 1 Grand Prix. But hey, that's why they hire impartial juries, and that's why there's a completely neutral sim racer giving you a lowdown of 2022's best F1 experiences. We're going to take an in-depth look at F122, isolate what it does well, what it does less well, and depending on what you're after in a bleeding-edge Formula 1 game, we'll then put forward the best sim racing options currently available to get your F1 fix. Good stuff first. Because Codemasters F1 series is officially licensed, the major advantage it has over every other game is access to the team's branding and likenesses of the drivers. As a result, we get all of the cool stuff that entails. F122 has by far the best career mode out of any current F1 driving game. Starting a new driver puts you on a legitimate career pathway, beginning as a quasi-rookie in F2 if you so wish, and proving yourself in the championship in the hopes of being offered a seat in the top tier of racing. Should you be so blessed, you may get a contract from any of the actual F1 teams currently operating in 2022. After accepting the contract, or just moving along and whistling if your name is Piastri, you'll still be welcomed into a team and provided a semi-managerial role. You're not only driving for the team, but you're also suggesting what they should be investing in with their R&D, and you're helping plan the race strategy, the calendar of events, and time-based progression, as well as milestones and accolades depending on how you perform in races, creates a true feeling of being right up in it. They aren't just meaningless individual races, they're all leading toward that coveted championship. Through your journey, you'll be asked to make key decisions and do some press work, some of which can land you with a high-profile driver rivalry which thrifty operators can use to their advantage. After the hot air is dispelled and the lights go out, all that really matters is how well you perform. This is where the BOP system really comes into its own. Because the cars are balanced against each other, roughly with performance differentials mirroring the real world, if, for instance, you get a seat with McLaren and turn up the simulation difficulty high enough, it ultimately doesn't matter how awesomely you drive. Even the most colossal effort still gets rewarded with a spot squarely in the midfield. Just ask my man Lando.
I ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine.
If, however, you're closer to my man Danny and not driving the absolute pants off the car, you'll instead be struggling to fight it out for scraps near the rear midfield. It's pretty awesome to have the brutality of real-life performance differentials mirrored in a casual game. It really helps sympathize with the guys fighting it out in less competitive machinery. Speaking of brutality, you can drive F122 all the way up to simulation damage mode. While this is great in theory, we'll explain in our shortly upcoming bad stuff chapter why you probably don't ever want to enable it. So, that about rounds out the good stuff portion. Moving on to the less good stuff. We have the audio visuals. While it's not set to blow your mind, the addition of ray tracing to the graphics engine allows it to at least adequately box with other races in 2022. However, this is an area it's going to get its butt squarely handed to it, as we'll show in our alternatives section coming up very soon. The car sounds have seen an improvement this year, and the cars all have the unique flair of sounding like distinctly different brands of cheap Japanese vacuum cleaner. While the sounds are anemic and thin, that's basically what they are in the real world too, so it'd be strange to complain about. This segues directly to the worst point of F122. Luckily, it's only a small thing. The driving itself. See, F122 handles less like a metallic chassis suspended on rubber tires and more like a UFO floating a few millimeters from the ground, which occasionally and unrecoverably likes to spin in circles whenever the accelerator isn't modulated with absolute perfection. Being a sim racer, I've of course never driven with any of the driving assists enabled, but what fascinates me about F122 being a reported casual game with a mainstream audience is that the F1 cars in it are substantially harder to drive with a wheel than even the most hardcore simulators. Strange that. On top of this, you have two small omissions in the physics. The first is a complete and utter absence of porpoising, which at the very least was added in every single sim racing recreation of these cars I've driven outside of F122. The other is slightly more significant. See, the physics tick rate is connected directly to the game's frame rate. What does this mean in English? Well, depending on how fast the game is running on your PC will influence how your car handles curbs. Running a supercomputer getting over 200 FPS, prepare to be launched over curbs with your very detailed physics engine. Running that same race at 30 or 60 FPS, you'll casually stroll over that same curb as if you're running a stadium truck. This is an insane omission in a racing game in 2022. We haven't had racing sims do this in what feels like decades, and if any single element truly shows how outdated and cobbled together Codemasters' physics engine is, it's this. Once you completely unteach yourself to drive like you do in the real world, you eventually get a hang of the inputs F122 wants you to make. It becomes serviceable enough to get through a race and experience all the drama, ups and downs, yellow flags, safety cars, weather changes, unplanned pit stops, and all the other drama that this game is so good at rendering. Except for launches. See, in 2022, this game still doesn't support analog clutches, so launching your car from a standing start is akin to successfully sacrificing a goat at the perfect moment during the celestial blood moon on the first day of the equinox. Oh, and there's the multiplayer, where the public lobbies are pretty much the teenager-infested T1 destruction derby nightmare you'd expect, so your options are to either deal with it or become an esports nerd and forego having a life outside the game. Finally, as promised, there is a simulation damage mode, but unfortunately this makes your reliance on the AI all that much greater. This is unfortunate because in F122, like most racing games, the AI will on occasion randomly punt you like you don't even exist and ruin what could otherwise be an immaculate race. Okay, enough about F122, I promised alternatives after all. After substantial investigation, many red flags, and lots of abuse hurled at my PC, I've discovered that there's only one real alternative to F122 for modern F1 players, and even that comes at a cost. See, there is no one sim that does it all perfectly. In fact, none of them even get close to matching its career mode, so just let that one go while we're still here. However, if you want to better emulate the feeling of driving a modern Formula 1 car, well, that's where we can help. I was originally going to offer a batch of alternatives, listing their pros and cons off against one another, but the more I delved in and the more I drove, the more it became obvious that there was only one real candidate as an alternative. This, as no great surprise to any sim racers watching this, is the venerable Assetto Corsa. We'll delve into the honorable mentions after we cover why AC is so awesome for modern Formula 1 races and let you know why the runners-up didn't cut it. I'll also tell you how to make it simulate modern Formula 1 races because out of the box and without substantial mods, it will not do this at all. You may have seen Assetto Corsa in passing, perhaps used for Formula 1 guides by little-known personalities such as Nico freaking Rosberg. What? Most of the F1 drivers that were forced onto the Codemasters F1 game back in 2020 when, well, they had no other option to race, quickly realized that it wasn't it. Those who wanted to follow the F1 sim racing rabbit hole began doing what all the rest of us do, using Assetto Corsa with modded RSS Formula 1 cars. See, while aspects of Assetto Corsa are quite dated, being a title from all the way back in 2014, it happens to have cultivated one of the most intense modding communities in gaming history. So intense, in fact, that they've completely overhauled and transformed the game. Assetto Corsa is now one of the nicest looking simulators on the market, which is of course why it's my sim of choice for creating this channel's famous Formula 1 what if races. With all the graphical bells and whistles enabled, AC smokes the floor with F122. There are even car sound packs recreating the Honda engines, Mercedes, Renault, Ferrari, etc. And even though, much like the real cars, they sound somewhat anemic, they somehow still manage to be more full-bodied and impressive than the official game. But this isn't the big draw. See, modern modded content for Assetto Corsa has the ability to expand beyond its physics engine, something used to great effect by the current top-tier recreations of 2022 Formula 1 cars. You have the option of picking between the VRC Formula Alpha 2022, which is what you're seeing in this footage, or the RSS Formula Hybrid X 2022 Evo, which is a hell of a mouthful. Both are roughly equivalent on the quality front, with the RSS driving more forgivingly and the VRC being a mite twitchier on the throttle, similarly to the official game, though far, far better. What I like about the VRC is that for the first time it added flexing wings and things such as visibly adjustable aero parts. This helps aid immersion a ton. This, when combined with Assetto Corsa's laser scan tracks, make for a far more realistic driving experience than the one rendered in F122. Now, unfortunately, these amazing benefits come with some major caveats. There is no Formula 1 rule set for Assetto Corsa. So, for instance, DRS is enabled for every car on every lap whenever they're in a DRS zone. Doesn't matter if they were 1 second within the car in front or if they're the race leader. Doesn't matter if it's lap 1 or lap 12. There is also no performance difference between teams. It's literally just the one identical car being reskinned and driven by everyone. So that realistic BOP aspect flies out the window. Not to mention that, due to licensing issues, the modding teams tend to steer clear of exactly modding the specific performance of one team's car or another. So, where does one start? Well, after picking up the Assetto Corsa Ultimate Edition during a sales period for literal peanuts, you then move on and get Custom Shaders Patch, Content Manager, and Soul. Links to all of these are of course listed in the description below. They will hook into the base game, bootstrapping a new launcher, completely overhauling the way you interact with it, and adding all kinds of cool new features such as variable weather, time of day, etc, etc. Eventually, you work your way towards the mods. See, vanilla Assetto Corsa does have tracks such as Silverstone and Imola, but you'll see that they're older versions with outdated curbing, signage, etc. This is where our friends at Race Department come in handy. See, not only does Race Department have skin packs for all the teams currently on the grid, but they also have updated track skins for pre-existing tracks, as well as versions of the F1 2022 calendar circuits which don't come with Assetto Corsa. So in a sense, you can recreate the championship for yourself. Now, don't get me wrong, this quote-unquote career experience is a pale shadow of what the Codemasters game offers. You're going down the Assetto Corsa rabbit hole for the quality of the driving experience. Comparing the two side by side, it's difficult to think of F1 22 as anything more than a toy during the race itself, which is such a shame because it handles most other facets of being an F1 game so well. Assetto Corsa, conversely, is hampered by a rather crazy AI that isn't at all suited to high-speed F1 races, so massive T1 pileups and wipeouts are to be expected on the regular. It's unfortunately also hampered by a rather dated time model that doesn't ratify car behavior over complex curbing with very much conviction. On top of that, even at 100% difficulty, the AI don't constitute much of a challenge for an experienced racer. That aside, if you're a hot lap fiend or just want to don the virtual visor and pretend to be your favorite racer running a practice or qualifying session, Assetto Corsa is still your one-stop shop. So then, what about our honorable mentions? Some of them do things that Assetto Corsa can't, so why didn't they make the cut? Well, let's run through them quickly. Automobilista 2. I genuinely thought I could put this one up alongside Assetto Corsa as a legitimate contender for modern Formula 1 racing, since this series is so well renowned for its rendering of open wheelers. The unfortunate thing is that there is so much crazy rubber banding when racing the AI, and when on a wet surface, it's so blatantly clear that the AI are on a completely different physics model to the player that racing them is largely pointless. Least of which, if, like myself, you like to run simulation damage and randomly get cars jinking into you, completely crushing your race. Looking beyond this, AMS2 has one of the most ambitious physics engines powering it. In theory, it should be capable of rendering the most realistic F1 car behavior out of any modern sim, sans perhaps iRacing. In reality, however, the current crop of cars at models are a few seconds faster on most tracks than the real-life equivalents, and driver might wonky compared to the Assetto Corsa cars. This is why AMS2 has landed in our honorable mentions. Race Room. This sim recently released its rendering of the modern 2022 cars, and while in theory it should be amazing, my personal experiences with it weren't quite that. Perhaps there is a requisite amount of car tuning it requires to feel right, but I just wasn't able to get the car feeling comfortable. Assetto Corsa, comparatively, felt rather effortless. Combine this with Race Room's fairly notable drawbacks as a sim, from having a very slow, clunky web-based menu, DX9 rendering engine, in-house currency, and general dated presentation, and it would have been near impossible to get new players trying this sim. This is why it's made our notable mentions. rFactor 2. I would love to comment on the quality of RF2's recent rendering of the 2022 car, but there's one small problem. It won't even boot into the menu of the game. rFactor 2 is known as the most buggy racing sim, and for very good reason. I've not been able to boot into RF2 for months, despite getting assistance directly from the devs, following countless forum threads, wiping settings, reinstalling the game, etc. This follows with the general principle of using rFactor 2. When it works, it can be mind-blowingly amazing, but the amount of times it works are far, far fewer than the amount of times it does not work. At all. Finally, we have iRacing. I left this as the final notable mention because, technicalities aside, it should have actually taken Assetto Corsa's place as my main recommendation for an F1 22 alternative. See, in 2021, iRacing released the Mercedes W12 F1 car, and it was without a shadow of a doubt the single most immersive, connected, and accurate feeling rendering of a Formula 1 car I've ever driven in my life. It was so enthralling, in fact, that many of us in the SimSphere decided to start a friendly competition hot lapping the Nordschleife. The technicality is that as of this moment, iRacing has yet to render this year's car, though it reportedly is planned. Once that moment comes, you can rest assured that if you want the most accurate experience of driving this year's cars, there will be a 99% chance you'll find it in iRacing. Being connected directly to the Mercedes-AMG F1 team and deriving data directly from them, nobody else is as well positioned as iRacing to render a realistic simulation of modern F1 cars. So what do you think? Maybe in some blissful, far-off future we'll have Codemasters developing the career experience of an F1 game that's powered by iRacing's physics. Until then, however, we have the venerable Assetto Corsa and its legion of very talented modders. Like and subscribe for future sim racing content, grab the gear I used to record much of this footage using the links down below to support the channel, let me know if I missed anything or what we should cover in future videos, and until the next time, I'll see you later.